She thinks it's just a kind gesture, until one dinner invitation turns her whole world upside down. But not everyone believes in her honesty. Whispers spread, accusations fly, and the powerful son of the wallet's owner will do anything to drive her away. What begins as a simple act of honesty spirals into a battle over dignity, faith, and the future of her family. Will one act of kindness save her, or destroy everything she loves? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, the worn leather wallet pressing against her ribs through her coat pocket. Every bump in the road seemed to make it weigh heavier, like a stone settling deeper into a pond. The grocery bags rustled in the back seat where Emily had packed them, filled with the marked-down bread and nearly expired milk she'd managed to find. "Mom, you're awful quiet," Emily said, adjusting the collar of her threadbare winter coat. "Everything okay?" Clara forced a smile, glancing at her daughter's concerned face. "Just tired, sweetie. Long day at the diner." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. In 15 years of raising Emily alone, she'd never been anything but honest with her. The car's heater wheezed, barely keeping up with the biting cold outside. Through the windshield, fat snowflakes danced in the beam of her headlights, making it hard to focus on the road. Or maybe it was just her thoughts scattered like those snowflakes, swirling around what she'd found. Emily reached over and turned down the radio's static-filled Christmas music. "You sure? You look kind of pale." "I'm fine," Clara said, but her voice cracked. The wallet seemed to burn against her side. She'd only meant to check for ID when she opened it, but then she'd seen all that cash. More money than she'd held in her hands in months. The streets were nearly empty as they drove through town, holiday lights twinkling from porches and store windows. Clara's mind wandered to their own dark apartment, where she hadn't been able to afford putting up Christmas decorations this year. The unpaid electric bill sat on their kitchen table, red letters warning of disconnection. The rent was due in a week, and her tips had been terrible lately, with the bad weather keeping customers away from the diner. "Hey, look!" Emily pointed at a house they were passing, its yard filled with inflatable snowmen and reindeer. "Remember when we used to have decorations like that?" Clara's throat tightened. That was a while ago, wasn't it? Back when Emily's father was alive, before the cancer ate through their savings and left them with nothing but memories and debt. The wallet pressed against her side again as she turned onto their street. She thought of the driver's license she'd glimpsed inside, belonging to some James Whitaker. The address was on the wealthy side of town. Someone who probably wouldn't even miss a few $100s. "Mom?" Emily's voice pulled her back to the present. "You missed our turn." Clara blinked, realizing she'd driven past their apartment building. "Sorry, honey." Got distracted. She pulled into the next driveway to turn around, and as she did, the headlights swept across a church sign. The words, "Sunday Service, Finding Light in Dark Times," seemed to glow accusingly in the beam. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of example would she be setting for Emily if she kept the wallet? She'd worked so hard to teach her daughter about honesty, about doing the right thing even when it was difficult. But wasn't taking care of her child the most important thing? The money could keep their lights on, put food in the fridge, maybe even buy Emily a Christmas present. Earth to Mom. Emily waved her hand in front of Clara's face. "Are you sure you're okay? You're acting really weird." Clara pulled back onto their street, her mind racing. She thought of all the times she'd lectured Emily about integrity, about how character was what you did when nobody was watching. Now here she sat, being watched by the person who mattered most, with stolen money burning a hole in her pocket. The old car crunched through the snow as she parked in their usual spot. Emily grabbed the grocery bags from the back seat, the plastic handles stretching thin under the weight. Clara sat frozen, key in the ignition, as her daughter headed toward their building's entrance. "Coming, Mom?" Emily called over her shoulder. Clara's hand moved to her coat pocket, feeling the smooth leather of the wallet. The wind howled outside, rattling the car windows, as if nature itself was demanding an answer. Was this a divine test of her character, or a blessed chance to ease their struggles? She'd prayed so many times for help, for some way to keep going. But this didn't feel like an answer to prayer. It felt like a weight on her soul. Emily stamped her feet on the front step, waiting. The grocery bag swayed in her hands, and Clara could see her shivering in her too-thin coat. That coat should have been replaced months ago, but there had never been enough money. Just like there wasn't enough for proper groceries, or Christmas decorations, or the mounting bills. Clara's fingers curled around the wallet. Such a small thing, really. Just leather and paper. But it held the power to solve so many problems, or to destroy everything she'd taught her daughter about right and wrong. She looked up at Emily, illuminated by the building's porch light, her breath visible in the cold air as she waited patiently for her mother. The moment stretched out like a thread about to snap. Clara sat there, caught between desperation and dignity, between need and integrity. The wallet felt impossibly heavy in her pocket, as if it contained not just money but the weight of her own character, her values, everything she'd tried to build her life around. Snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in white, as if trying to make everything pure again. But Clara knew there was no purity in theft, no matter how she tried to justify it. She thought of her late husband, how proud he'd been of her strength in raising Emily alone. What would he think if she took this easy way out? Emily knocked on the car window, her face pinched with worry. "Mom, seriously, what's wrong? You're scaring me." Clara stared at her daughter's concerned face through the glass, seeing in it every sacrifice she'd made, every lesson she'd taught, every principle she'd stood for. The wallet pressed against her side, like a judgment, waiting for her decision. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clara's small kitchen table, now covered with a scattered mess of envelopes marked in bold red letters. Final notice and past due. She'd been up since dawn, writing numbers in the margins of old receipts, trying to make the math work out differently than it had the 100 times before. Emily sat across from her, spoon clinking against a chipped bowl of generic cornflakes. The leather wallet lay between them like a judge's gavel waiting to fall. Clara couldn't stop staring at it, her stomach churning with each glance. "Those cornflakes getting soggy?" Clara asked, trying to sound normal despite the tension in her voice. "They were soggy when I started," Emily said with a shrug, but she kept eating anyway. "Mom, that wallet's not going to disappear if you stop looking at it." Clara pushed aside a water bill and picked up the wallet again. The leather was soft and well worn, speaking of years of use. Inside, beside the neat stack of $100 bills that made her hands shake, she found several credit cards and a driver's license. The face in the photo was dignified, an elderly African-American man with kind eyes and silver hair. "Judge James Whittaker," Clara read aloud, her finger tracing the name. Emily perked up. "Oh, we learned about him in social studies. He was super important during the civil rights movement and stuff. He lives in that big white house on Maple Street." Clara found a bank card and reached for her phone. "I'm going to call the bank, see if they can contact him." "Mom." Emily's voice took on that pleading tone Clara knew too well. "There's got to be $1,000 in there. We could pay the electric bill and get real groceries, not just the almost expired stuff." Clara's heart squeezed. She dialed the bank's number, letting the automated system guide her through the menu while she watched her daughter push soggy cereal around the bowl. "Good morning, First National Bank. This is Sandra speaking. How may I help you?" Clara cleared her throat. "Yes, hello. I found a wallet belonging to one of your customers, Judge James Whittaker. I was hoping you could help me contact him." "Oh my goodness, Judge Whittaker. He was just in here yesterday, worried sick about his missing wallet. Let me get his contact information for you right away." While the bank representative pulled up the details, Emily whispered, "Mom, please. Nobody would know. We need it so bad." Clara covered the phone's microphone. "Emily Grace Thompson, that money isn't ours. End of discussion." The hurt in Emily's eyes stabbed at Clara's heart, but she forced herself to focus on writing down the judge's address and phone number. After thanking the bank representative, she sat looking at the information for a long moment. "Get your coat," she said finally. "We're going to return this wallet." Emily slumped in her chair. "Now? But it's Saturday morning. The sooner we return it, the better." Clara stood, gathering the bills into a neat pile and tucking them into a drawer where she wouldn't have to look at them. The right thing doesn't get easier if you wait. While Emily trudged off to get her coat, Clara studied herself in the hallway mirror. Her waitress uniform was clean but worn, the collar fraying slightly. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, but she could see the worry lines around her eyes, the slight downturn of her mouth that seemed permanent these days. "Ready," Emily announced, appearing beside her with a dramatic sigh. They climbed into their old Corolla, the engine protesting the cold morning air. Clara had to try 3 times before it finally caught, and she sent up a silent prayer of thanks. The last thing she needed was car trouble on top of everything else. As they drove across town, the neighborhoods changed dramatically. Their own street of small rental houses gave way to Victorian homes with wraparound porches and maintained lawns. Emily pressed her face against the window, watching the houses grow larger. "Did you know his son owns like half the businesses in town?" Emily said suddenly. "Tyler in my class says the judge's son is super rich but also super mean. They say he won't even talk to his dad anymore." Clara gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Honey, we don't listen to gossip. It's not our business. I'm just saying, if his son's so rich, maybe the judge doesn't even need this money." "Emily," Clara's voice was firm, "that's not how it works. What's right is right, no matter who it affects." They turned onto Maple Street, and Clara's heart rate picked up. The houses here were the oldest and grandest in town, with massive oak trees lining the street. At the end of the block stood a stately white colonial with black shutters and a circular driveway. The Corolla seemed to shrink as they approached, its rusty spots and dented fender more obvious against the manicured perfection of the judge's property. Clara pulled up to the iron gates, her palms sweating against the steering wheel. "Well," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt, "here we are." Emily stared up at the house through the windshield. "Mom, what if he thinks we stole it?" The question hit too close to Clara's own fears. She'd been wrestling with that same worry all night. "He won't," she said, hoping she sounded convincing. "We're doing the right thing, bringing it back. That's what matters." She reached over and squeezed Emily's hand, as much for her own comfort as her daughter's. The wallet sat heavy in her coat pocket as she steered their car through the open gates, the gravel crunching under their tires as they made their way up the curved driveway toward the impressive front door. Clara stood at the front door of the grand Victorian house, her heart pounding against her ribs. The morning sun highlighted the building's faded green paint and architectural details that spoke of better days, ornate trim work, wraparound porch, and tall windows with delicate muntins. Though showing signs of age, the house still maintained an air of quiet dignity. Emily bounced on her toes beside her mother, seemingly unfazed by the grandeur. "Come on, Mom," she whispered, giving Clara's sleeve a gentle tug. "Just knock already." Clara smoothed her waitress uniform self-consciously, wishing she'd had time to change into something more presentable. Taking a deep breath, she raised her hand and knocked 3 times on the heavy wooden door. Footsteps approached from inside, and Clara clutched the wallet tighter in her trembling hands. The door opened to reveal an elderly African-American man, tall and distinguished despite his advanced years. He wore pressed khakis and a cable-knit sweater, and his silver-rimmed glasses sat low on his nose. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention, warm and kind, with crow's feet at the corners that suggested a lifetime of ready smiles. "Yes?" he asked, his voice deep and measured. Clara cleared her throat. "Judge Whitaker, I'm Clara Thompson, and this is my daughter Emily." She gestured to the teenager beside her. "I found your wallet last night in the grocery store parking lot. I wanted to return it to you." She held out the worn leather wallet, and James's eyebrows rose in surprise. He patted his back pocket automatically. "My wallet? I hadn't even realized it was missing." He accepted it with both hands, opening it to examine the contents. "Everything's here. Cards, cash, all of it." He looked up at Clara, his expression filled with wonder. "You must have found this late last night, in that bitter cold." Clara nodded, trying not to fidget under his thoughtful gaze. "Yes, sir. Around 9 o'clock. And you went to the trouble of tracking me down first thing this morning." He shook his head, clearly moved. That kind of honesty is rare these days. He reached into the wallet and began pulling out several bills. "Please, let me give you a reward." "Oh no," Clara said quickly, taking a step back. "That's not necessary. Really? But it is, James insisted, still holding out the money. What you did, especially in these difficult times, it means something. Please, accept this as a thank you. Clara's cheeks burned as she shook her head again. I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, they wouldn't have, Emily piped up suddenly. Mom almost didn't. We're really behind on bills and… Emily! Clara's voice came out sharper than intended, and she felt her face flush even deeper. The girl fell silent, but the damage was done. Clara wanted nothing more than to sink into the wooden porch boards beneath her feet. But when she dared to look at James again, his expression held no judgment, only a deeper kindness that somehow made her feel both more exposed and less afraid. He tucked the money back into his wallet with deliberate care. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice gentle, would you and your daughter do me the honor of coming inside for a cup of tea? I'd very much like to thank you properly. Clara started to decline. She had to get Emily to school, herself to work. But James continued, I've just put the kettle on, and my wife always said it was bad luck to drink tea alone. A shadow of old grief passed briefly across his features. I have some fresh scones as well. Please, Mom? Emily's eyes were bright with interest as she looked between the grand old house and the distinguished man in the doorway. We have time for tea, don't we? Clara glanced at her watch. They really didn't, but something in James's expression, a mixture of kindness and what might have been loneliness, made her hesitate. Well, she said slowly. James's face brightened. Excellent. He stepped back, opening the door wider. Please, come in out of the cold. The warmth from inside the house reached out to them like a welcoming embrace. Clara found herself following Emily across the threshold, the rich scent of bergamot already drifting from somewhere deeper in the house. Right this way, James said, leading them through a high-ceilinged foyer. Dark wooden wainscoting lined the walls, and a grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the corner. Though everything was clean and well-maintained, Clara noticed signs of age throughout: worn carpets, faded wallpaper, small cracks in the plaster ceiling. She recognized it as the home of someone who took pride in what they had, but lacked the means, or perhaps the motivation, to keep everything in pristine condition. Somehow, this made her feel slightly more at ease than if everything had been perfect. The kitchen's just through here, James said, gesturing them forward. I hope you like Earl Grey. James led Clara and Emily into a cozy study lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. Afternoon sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting warm patterns across hardwood floors, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish, with just a hint of pipe tobacco lingering in the air. Please, make yourselves comfortable, James said, gesturing to a pair of well-loved leather armchairs. Clara perched carefully on the edge of one while Emily sank right in, her eyes wide as she took in their surroundings. Black and white photographs covered one wall, telling the story of James's remarkable career. In one, a much younger James stood on courthouse steps, his fist raised in triumph. In another, he sat behind a judge's bench, his expression stern but just. Those are from my early days, James explained, following Emily's gaze. Back when the fights were harder, but the victories meant even more. Emily jumped up to examine the photos more closely. You were a judge? That's so cool. What kind of cases did you work on? Clara started to scold her daughter for being nosy, but James waved away her concern with a gentle smile. Civil rights cases mostly, making sure everyone got treated fair and square under the law, no matter what they looked like or where they came from. A silver-haired woman appeared in the doorway with a tray of tea and cookies. I thought you might enjoy some refreshments, she said, introducing herself as Mrs. Peterson, James's housekeeper of 20 years. Thank you, Margaret, James said warmly. These ladies did me a great service today. Found my wallet and brought it right back, when plenty of folks might have been tempted otherwise. Clara's cheeks flushed. Anyone would have done the same. No, James said firmly, settling into his own chair. Not anyone, not these days. Honesty like that is rare and precious. He stirred sugar into his tea thoughtfully. What made you decide to return it? Clara wrapped her hands around the delicate teacup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I couldn't keep it. It wouldn't have been right." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Even when times are hard, you have to hold on to what's true, what's good." "Mom always says that doing the right thing matters most when it's hardest to do it," Emily chimed in, returning to her chair with a cookie in hand. James's eyes crinkled with approval. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, you know, not just believing in God, but believing in goodness itself, even when the world makes it difficult." "Do you go to church, Judge Whittaker?" Emily asked between bites. "First Baptist, every Sunday," he replied. "Though not as often as I'd like lately. These old legs don't always cooperate anymore." He leaned forward, looking at Emily intently. "And please, call me James, both of you." Clara watched as her daughter and the elderly judge fell into easy conversation. Emily asked about his most memorable cases, and James shared stories of standing up against injustice, each one carefully chosen to highlight the importance of perseverance and moral courage. "Sometimes," James explained, "doing what's right doesn't feel like winning at first. But you keep going anyway, because the truth has a way of coming out in the end." Clara recognized the wisdom in his words, thinking of her own struggles to maintain dignity through hardship. The weight of unpaid bills still pressed on her mind, but somehow it felt lighter in this room, surrounded by the testimony of one man's lifelong commitment to justice. As the afternoon light began to fade, Clara reluctantly stood. "We should be going. Thank you so much for your hospitality." "Nonsense," James protested. "You must come back tomorrow evening for a proper dinner. Margaret makes a pot roast that would make an angel weep." Clara shook her head. "That's very kind, but we couldn't impose—" "Please, Mom?" Emily interrupted, practically bouncing in her seat. "Judge James was going to tell me more about the time he helped desegregate the city swimming pool." "It would be my pleasure," James said, his expression warm, but leaving no room for argument. 7 o'clock tomorrow. Margaret always makes too much food anyway." Emily's pleading eyes and James's gentle insistence wore down Clara's resistance. "All right," she conceded. "Thank you. That's very generous." As they walked to their car, Emily chatted excitedly about the judge's stories and the dinner to come. Clara listened with half an ear, her mind churning. James's kindness touched her deeply, but years of struggling alone had taught her to be wary of depending on anyone's generosity. The old car groaned to life, and Clara steered them toward home. Emily continued to bubble with enthusiasm about their new friend, while Clara's thoughts wavered between gratitude for such unexpected kindness and anxiety about accepting help. The wallet's return had led to something she hadn't anticipated, not just a reward refused, but the possibility of a connection she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. Traffic lights cast alternating patterns of red and green across the windshield as Clara drove, matching the stop-and-go rhythm of her thoughts. James's genuine warmth and Emily's obvious delight pulled her forward, while her ingrained caution held her back. She'd learned the hard way that life rarely offered gifts without strings attached. But as she glanced at her daughter's animated face, Clara couldn't help but wonder if sometimes, just sometimes, a simple act of honesty could open a door to something truly good. The evening sun cast long shadows across James's front porch as Clara and Emily stood at his door. Clara smoothed down her best navy dress, faded but clean, and adjusted Emily's collar one last time. She'd spent an hour helping Emily style her hair into a neat braid, wanting them both to look presentable. "Mom, stop fussing," Emily whispered, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "I look fine." Before Clara could respond, the door swung open. James stood there in pressed slacks and a crisp, button-down shirt, his warm smile making his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you both came." The rich aroma of pot roast and fresh bread wafted from inside. Clara's stomach rumbled quietly. They hadn't had a proper home-cooked meal in weeks. "Something smells amazing," Emily said, stepping inside. Clara noticed how her daughter's shoulders relaxed, as if she already felt at home here. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Martinez, insisted on cooking tonight," James explained, leading them through the foyer. "She's been with me 20 years and treats me like a helpless child." He chuckled, the sound deep and pleasant. "But I must admit, her cooking is far better than anything I could manage." The dining room took Clara's breath away. A heavy oak table gleamed beneath a crystal chandelier, set with fine china and silver that must have been passed down through generations. Fresh flowers brightened the center, and cloth napkins were folded into perfect triangles beside each plate. "This is beautiful," Clara murmured, suddenly aware of how out of place they must look. James pulled out chairs for both of them. "Beauty should be shared," he said simply, as if reading her thoughts. "What good is a formal dining room if you can't fill it with good company?" Mrs. Martinez appeared with a steaming platter, her round face beaming. She set down the pot roast, surrounded by carrots and potatoes, then brought out fresh rolls and a garden salad. After making sure everything was perfect, she disappeared back into the kitchen. "This looks incredible," Clara said, watching Emily eye the feast hungrily. "Please, help yourselves," James insisted, passing the serving dishes. "And Emily, I want to hear all about school. What subjects interest you most?" As they ate, Emily's natural enthusiasm emerged. She told James about her love of history and writing, her eyes shining when he mentioned the extensive library in his study. Clara found herself relaxing too, savoring both the delicious food and the easy conversation. Between bites, James shared stories from his years on the bench. He described fighting segregation in schools, protecting voting rights, and standing up to powerful people who thought themselves above the law. There was this one case, he recalled, leaning forward in his chair, where a corporation wanted to build a factory right in the middle of a poor neighborhood. They'd bought off local officials, but the community fought back. Those people had so little, but they had such dignity, such strength. Emily was transfixed. "What happened?" "Well, the evidence was on their side, but the corporation's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They even dug up dirt on community leaders, trying to discredit them." James shook his head. "But I wouldn't allow it. In my courtroom, justice didn't bow to money or power." Clara noticed how animated he became while telling these stories, as if the years fell away and he was once again that fierce defender of the downtrodden. "You must be very proud of your career," Clara said softly. Something shifted in James's expression. The energy drained from him, replaced by a weary sadness. "I tried to instill those values in my son," he said, setting down his fork. "Daniel? He had such a bright spirit as a boy. But somewhere along the way, he lost sight of what truly matters." The room grew quiet. Even Emily sensed the change in mood, setting down her roll and watching James with concern. "Daniel runs Whitaker Real Estate now," James continued, his voice heavy. "Very successful. But his methods." He shook his head. "He forgets there are real people affected by his business decisions. People like you, Clara." Clara's chest tightened at the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "No, I'm the one who's sorry." James managed a small smile. "I didn't mean to burden our lovely dinner with old regrets. It's just watching you with Emily, seeing how you chose integrity over necessity when you found my wallet. It reminded me of what Daniel has lost, of what I failed to preserve in him." Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over James's weathered one. The gesture was so natural, so compassionate, that Clara felt tears prick at her corners of her eyes. "You know what my mom always says?" Emily asked. "It's never too late to do the right thing." James covered Emily's hand with his other one, his eyes glistening. "Your mother is very wise." He looked at Clara. "You've raised an extraordinary daughter." The rest of the evening passed more lightly, with James showing them family photos and Emily discovering an old chess set in the corner. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted in their lives. As they prepared to leave, James insisted they take home containers of leftovers that Mrs. Martinez had carefully packed. Standing in the doorway, James clasped Clara's hand. "Thank you both for coming. You've brought more light into this old house than it's seen in years." On the drive home, Emily clutched the chess set James had insisted she borrow, while Clara's mind whirled with everything they'd learned about their host. The evening had been more than just a thank-you dinner. It felt like the beginning of something none of them had expected. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when Clara stepped out to retrieve the newspaper. Her breath formed small clouds in the chilly air as she pulled her thin robe tighter. That's when she noticed a white envelope taped to the door, her name written in neat block letters. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free. The paper was thick, official-looking. Inside, she found a single typed page with the property management company's letterhead. As her eyes scanned the words, her heart sank deeper with each line. Dear Ms. Thompson, regret to inform, and property being listed for sale. 60-day notice to vacate. Clara's legs went weak. She leaned against the doorframe, reading the letter again and again, hoping the words would somehow change. They didn't. 60 days. Just 2 months to find a new place. Scrape together first and last month's rent, security deposit, moving expenses, all the money she didn't have. Inside, Emily sat at their small kitchen table, spooning cereal into her mouth while reviewing notes for a history test. Clara forced her face into what she hoped was a neutral expression as she folded the letter and slipped it into her robe pocket. Running late, sweetie. Better hurry up with that breakfast. Emily glanced up, milk dripping from her spoon. You okay, Mom? You look kind of pale. Just tired. Clara busied herself making coffee she couldn't spare the time to drink. Big morning rush coming at the diner. She shooed Emily off to school, then stood in their tiny kitchen, gripping the counter until her knuckles turned white. The morning light illuminated every crack in the walls, every worn spot on the linoleum, imperfections she'd learned to live with, because this place, however humble, was home. Their home. At work, Clara moved through her routine like a robot. Pour coffee, take orders, smile. The letter burned in her uniform pocket where she'd transferred it, its weight far heavier than paper should be. More coffee, hon. She realized she'd been standing at table 6 for too long, pot hovering over an already full cup. No, I'm good, the customer said, giving her an odd look. In the kitchen, Joe, the cook, called out orders while she stared at the ticket rack. Order up, Clara. Table 4's eggs are getting cold. Sorry. She grabbed the plates, nearly dropping one. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The lunch rush came and went. Clara's tip jar looked emptier than usual. She knew her service had been distracted. Every dollar she didn't earn felt like another nail in their coffin. When Emily stopped by after school, a daily ritual since the diner was on her walk home, Clara tried to act normal. But her daughter had always been too perceptive for her own good. What's wrong? Emily slid onto a stool at the counter, dropping her backpack at her feet. And don't say nothing. You've got that worry wrinkle between your eyes. Clara wiped down the already clean counter. Just a lot on my mind, sweetie. Mom. Emily's voice carried that stern tone she'd somehow perfected. You're doing that thing where you try to protect me by not telling me stuff. I'm not a little kid anymore. Clara looked at her daughter. Really looked at her. When had Emily grown so mature? Her baby girl was turning into a young woman, one who deserved honesty. Still, the words stuck in her throat. I got a letter this morning, Clara finally said, keeping her voice low so other customers wouldn't hear. The landlord is selling the house. We have to move. Emily's face fell. But where will we go? I'll figure something out. Clara reached across the counter to squeeze Emily's hand. I always do, right? But they both knew this was different. Their neighborhood had changed over the past year, renovated houses, new coffee shops, higher rents. Finding another place they could afford seemed impossible. The afternoon dragged on. Clara's feet ached, her smile grew more forced, and her mind spun with calculations she couldn't make work. Their savings account held less than $300. Their current rent barely left enough for groceries and utilities. Everything in town was getting more expensive. When her shift finally ended, Clara's tip jar held exactly $42.17. She counted it twice, fighting back tears. At home, Emily tried to help by making dinner boxed mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it, a childhood favorite that now felt like a reminder of their circumstances. Clara pushed the food around her plate, her appetite gone. Maybe we could move in with Grandma, Emily suggested between bites. Clara shook her head. Her mother's one-bedroom apartment barely fit her mother, let alone 2 more people. Besides, it was 3 hours away. Away from Emily's school, Clara's job, everything they knew. "We'll find something," Clara said, but the words rang hollow. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Clara sat in the dark kitchen with her Bible open, though she couldn't focus on the words. The letter lay beside it, its message unchanged, no matter how many times she read it. Around midnight, she crept into Emily's room. Her daughter slept peacefully, one arm thrown over her head, dark hair spilling across the pillow. The moonlight through the window cast a gentle glow on her face, making her look younger than her 15 years. Clara sank down on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake her. Emily's chest rose and fell with steady breaths, untroubled by the storm brewing around them. Clara reached out to brush a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, then folded her hands in her lap. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely a breath, "I need your strength now. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know where to turn. But Emily deserves better than a mother who falls apart. Please, please help me be strong enough for her." A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the wall. Emily stirred, but didn't wake. Clara remained there, watching her daughter sleep, praying in silence as the night grew deeper. Clara sat in her car outside James's house, her hands gripping the steering wheel. The eviction notice lay crumpled in her purse, a constant reminder of the storm gathering over her small family. The stately old Victorian home before her seemed even more imposing now, its warm yellow porch light a beacon in the growing dusk. She dropped Emily at her friend's house for a study session, not wanting her daughter to witness this conversation. Taking a deep breath, Clara stepped out into the chilly evening air. The concrete path leading to James's front door felt longer than before. Before she could knock, the door swung open. James stood there in a cardigan sweater, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. "Clara? I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I'm sorry to come unannounced, Judge Whitaker," she said, wringing her hands. I needed to talk to you." Come in," he said, stepping aside. "And please, it's just James. You look like you've seen a ghost." The familiar scent of old books and leather furniture wrapped around her as she entered. James led her to the living room, where a chess set sat half-finished on the coffee table. "Can I get you some tea?" Clara shook her head, perching on the edge of an armchair. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to explain why Emily and why we probably won't be able to come for dinner anymore." James settled into his usual chair, his expression growing serious. "What's happened?" With trembling fingers, Clara retrieved the crumpled notice from her purse and smoothed it out. "My landlord is selling the house. We have to be out in 60 days. Her voice cracked. "I can barely afford the rent as it is. Finding a new place in this market." She trailed off, blinking back tears. James leaned forward, his weathered hands accepting the paper. As he read, his thick eyebrows drew together, and a deep frown creased his face. "Thompson Properties," he muttered, tapping the letterhead. "This is Daniel's company." Clara's head snapped up. "Your son's company?" "Yes." James set the notice down carefully, as if it might bite. "He bought up half the residential properties in town over the last decade. Turned them into luxury developments, he calls them." The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. "Oh," Clara stood quickly. "I shouldn't have come. I don't want to put you in an awkward position with your son." "Sit down, Clara," James said firmly, his judge's authority showing through. When she hesitated, he softened his tone. "Please, let me help." Slowly she sank back into the chair. "I'm not looking for charity." "I know you're not. That's precisely why I want to help." James picked up the notice again, studying it. "Daniel may be difficult, but he's not unreasonable. I'll speak with him. I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." James's voice held a quiet determination. "My son has lost his way, focused too much on profit margins, and not enough on people. Perhaps this is God's way of giving him a chance to remember his humanity." Clara twisted her hands in her lap. "What if he refuses? Then we'll figure something else out." James leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. You know, I've seen a lot of people in my courtroom over the years. Good people in bad situations, bad people in worse ones. But what always struck me was how a single act of kindness or cruelty could change everything. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. When you found my wallet, you could have kept it. No one would have known. But you chose honesty over necessity, dignity over desperation. That kind of integrity. It's rare these days. Clara felt her cheeks warm at the praise. I just did what was right. Exactly. James smiled. And now it's my turn to do what's right. Let me talk to Daniel. He may surprise us both. Looking around the warm, book-lined room, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in days. Hope. It was small and fragile, like a candle flame in the wind, but it was there. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for this, but for. She gestured vaguely at the room, trying to encompass everything, the dinners, the conversations, the feeling of being truly seen. James nodded, understanding in his eyes. You should get home to Emily. I'll call Daniel first thing in the morning. As Clara stood to leave, she noticed a photo on the mantel she hadn't seen before, a much younger James in his judge's robes, his arm around a small boy with serious eyes. Daniel. The same determination she saw in James's face now was visible in that long-ago snapshot, and somehow it made her hope grow stronger. The morning sun glinted off the glass and steel office building as James's vintage Cadillac pulled into the parking lot. Clara sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue dress she usually saved for church, but still felt out of place among the expensive cars and well-dressed professionals hurrying past. You don't have to do this, Clara said softly, watching a group of suited executives stride through the building's revolving doors. I can figure something out on my own. James adjusted his bow tie in the rearview mirror, his weathered face set with determination. Nonsense. My son needs to understand that running a business doesn't mean abandoning human decency. He patted her hand. Besides, I've faced tougher opponents in my courtroom days. The elevator ride to the 20th floor was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Clara's stomach churned as they stepped into a reception area decorated in chrome and black leather. Everything screamed wealth and power, from the massive abstract paintings to the sleek furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary. The receptionist, perfectly coiffed and professionally detached, looked up from her computer. Judge Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker is expecting you. Her eyes flickered briefly to Clara before dismissing her entirely. Daniel's corner office offered a commanding view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He stood with his back to the door when they entered, hands clasped behind him, studying the urban landscape below, like a general surveying his domain. His charcoal suit was immaculate, every detail calculated to project authority. Father, he said without turning, this is an unexpected pleasure. His tone suggested it was anything but. James cleared his throat. Daniel, I'd like you to meet Clara Thompson. Daniel turned slowly, his face a mask of controlled indifference. His features held echoes of James's, the same strong jaw, the same intelligent eyes, but where James's face showed warmth, Daniel's held only cold calculation. He didn't offer to shake Clara's hand. Miss Thompson. He gestured to the chairs in front of his massive desk. Please, sit. Though I must say, I'm curious why my father felt the need to bring one of my company's tenants to a business meeting. Clara sank into the leather chair, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. James remained standing, his presence carrying the authority of his years on the bench. Son, I'm here to discuss the eviction notice served to Clara and her daughter. James's voice was firm but gentle. Surely we can work out an arrangement that... There's nothing to discuss, Daniel cut in, settling into his executive chair. The property is being sold as part of a larger development project. All tenants were given proper notice according to the law. We're talking about people's lives, Daniel. Clara has a teenage daughter. They've been model tenants, never late with rent. And I'm running a business, not a charity. Daniel's eyes fixed on Clara. I assume you're behind this visit? Trying to use my father's influence? Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. "No, sir. Your father offered to help. I didn't ask for this meeting. Yet here you are." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Thompson, how exactly did you come to know my father?" "I found his wallet and returned it," Clara said simply. Daniel laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Of course. How convenient. And now you expect special treatment?" James stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's enough, Daniel. Clara refused any reward for her honesty. She's shown more integrity in one act than I've seen in many of the wealthy people who parade through your office." "Integrity doesn't pay property taxes or fund developments," Daniel replied coldly. "The sale is proceeding. The eviction stands." He turned to Clara. "I suggest you use your remaining time to find new accommodations, rather than manipulating my father's sympathies." Clara rose slowly from her chair, her back straight despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I didn't come here to beg, Mr. Whitaker. And I certainly didn't befriend your father to gain any advantage. He's been kind to my daughter and me, because that's who he is, something you seem to have forgotten." Daniel's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, she continued, her voice steady. "Thank you for your time. I'll have my things out by the deadline." She turned to James. "And thank you for trying. Emily and I appreciate it more than you know." James looked at his son with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You've become exactly what I fought against all those years in court, Daniel? A man who sees numbers instead of people." He shook his head. "Your mother would be ashamed." Daniel's face hardened at the mention of his mother, but he said nothing as Clara and James walked out. The click of the door closing behind them echoed with finality. In the elevator, James apologized quietly. "I'm sorry, Clara. I truly thought he might listen." Clara managed a small smile, though her eyes stung with unshed tears. "You tried. That means everything." She squared her shoulders. "But I won't let him see me break. Emily needs me to be strong, and that's exactly what I'm going to be." The morning sun was higher now as they walked back to James's car, warming the crisp air. Clara tilted her face up to it, letting its heat dry the moisture in her eyes. She had faced worse challenges than Daniel Whitaker's coldness. She would face this one too, with grace and determination. James paused at the car, his hand on the door handle, righteous anger still evident in the set of his shoulders. Clara touched his arm gently. "It's okay," she said. "Some people can only learn compassion the hard way. Right now, I need to focus on finding a new home for my daughter." The Sunday morning sky painted itself in gentle pastels as Clara's old car followed James's gleaming Cadillac to church. Emily sat in the passenger seat, wearing a dress Clara had carefully ironed the night before, her excitement visible in the way she kept smoothing the fabric with her hands. "Mom, do you think people will stare?" Emily asked, tugging at a loose thread. "You know, because we're sitting with Judge Whitaker?" Clara adjusted her rear-view mirror, catching a glimpse of her daughter's worried expression. "Honey, Judge James invited us because he wants us there. That's all that matters." The church stood proud against the morning light, its white steeple reaching toward heaven. Clara had driven past it countless times but had never ventured inside, feeling too worn down by life to face a congregation. Now, as she parked beside James's car, her heart fluttered with nervous energy. James waited for them at the bottom of the church steps, bow tie perfectly straight, his dark suit pressed immaculately. "Good morning, ladies," he called out, his smile warming the crisp air. "Ready to join our little family?" Inside, the sanctuary glowed with morning light, filtering through stained glass windows. Clara noticed how heads turned as James led them to his usual pew near the front, but the looks weren't unkind, just curious. An elderly woman 2 rows back leaned forward to squeeze Clara's shoulder in welcome. During the service, James's deep voice carried through the hymns, and Clara found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythms of worship. Emily sat between them, her shoulder touching James's arm, completely at ease. When the collection plate came around, Clara felt a moment of shame at the single dollar she could spare, but James's gentle pat on her hand told her he understood. After the service, during coffee hour in the basement, James stood up before the congregation. "I want to share something with you all," he announced, his judicial authority naturally drawing everyone's attention. "This week, I experienced something that restored my faith in human goodness." He gestured toward Clara, who felt her cheeks warm. "This lady found my wallet, full of cash, and didn't hesitate to return it. In these trying times, such honesty deserves recognition." The congregation burst into approving murmurs and warm smiles. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the church's food bank, immediately enlisted Clara to help with their next distribution. The choir director, noting Emily's interest in the morning songs, invited her to join youth choir practice. That afternoon, James invited them to his home again. While Clara helped him prepare lunch in his kitchen, Emily wandered into his study, drawn by the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Judge James," she called out. "These books aren't in any order at all." James chuckled, setting down his knife beside half-chopped vegetables. "I'm afraid my organizational skills have slipped since retiring. Would you like to help me sort them?" Emily's face lit up. "Can I really?" For the next several hours, Emily perched on a ladder, carefully organizing books while James sat in his leather armchair, sharing stories about each volume she held up. Clara worked nearby, dusting shelves, listening as James told Emily about arguing civil rights cases in the 60s, about facing down angry mobs with nothing but his faith in justice. "This one," James said, holding up a worn law book, "helped me win my first discrimination case. The plaintiff was a young woman, not much older than your mother, who'd lost her job because of the color of her skin. When we won, she hugged me and said, 'Now my daughter will have a chance.'" He looked at Clara meaningfully. "Sometimes the most important victories are the ones that help one person at a time." Monday afternoon found them back at James's house, Emily now deeply invested in organizing his vast collection of legal photographs and newspaper clippings. Clara tried to protest that they were imposing, but James wouldn't hear of it. "My house hasn't felt this alive in years," he insisted, watching Emily carefully label a box of historical documents. By Wednesday, Clara was helping James plan a small dinner party for some church members. She found herself sharing her mother's old recipes, teaching James how to make her famous apple pie. The kitchen filled with laughter as they worked, flour dusting their clothes. Thursday evening, Emily discovered James's old piano in the sitting room. Though out of tune, its keys still worked, and James's eyes misted over as Emily picked out a simple melody she'd learned at school. "My late wife used to play," he said softly. "I haven't opened that piano since she passed." Friday afternoon, Clara left work early with her manager's blessing. After James had become a regular at the diner to help Emily and James organize a box of old case files, he wanted to donate to the local historical society. Each manila folder told a story of justice sought, rights defended, lives changed. As they worked, Clara noticed how naturally Emily leaned against James's arm while he explained legal terms, how his hand patted her shoulder exactly as a grandfather's would. She saw how the loneliness had faded from James's eyes, replaced by a spark of joy whenever Emily peppered him with questions about his cases. That night, after tucking Emily into bed, Clara stood in their small living room, arms wrapped around herself, the weight of their uncertain future still pressed on her shoulders. The eviction notice still sat on her kitchen table, but something had shifted. The empty spaces in their life, the gaps left by years of struggle and loss, had begun to fill with something warm and unexpected. She moved to her own bedroom, changing into her worn nightgown. Through the thin walls, she could hear Emily humming one of the hymns from church. The sound wrapped around her like a comfort blanket, and Clara found herself whispering into the quiet darkness, "Maybe things really can turn around." The dishes from their shared meal still sat in James's sink, a testament to the comfortable familiarity that had grown between them over the past weeks. Clara insisted on washing up, but James waved her away with a gentle smile. "Let them be for now," he said, his voice warm and rich like honey. "I have something important to discuss." Emily perched on the edge of the weathered leather armchair, her favorite spot in James's study. The room smelled of old books and leather, with hints of the pine-scented candle James always kept burning on his desk. Clara sat nearby on the matching sofa, her hands folded in her lap, trying to hide her nervous habit of picking at her cuticles. James moved slowly to his desk, his movements deliberate but dignified. The brass lamp cast a warm glow across the polished wood as he opened a drawer and pulled out a glossy brochure. His eyes twinkled as he handed it to Emily. "What's this?" Emily asked, turning the colorful pages. Her eyes widened as she read the bold text across the front. "Future Leaders Scholarship Program. Building Tomorrow's Champions of Justice." Clara leaned forward, her heart quickening. James settled into his high-backed chair, watching their reactions with quiet satisfaction. "This is run by my church foundation," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of years of purpose. "We established it 20 years ago to help promising young people who might not otherwise have the means for higher education." Emily's fingers traced the photos of smiling students on the pages. "But why are you showing this to me?" James's smile deepened, creating a web of kind wrinkles around his eyes. "Because, young lady, you're exactly the kind of student we look for. Strong grades, stronger character, and a heart for helping others." Clara's throat tightened. She watched Emily's face light up with hope, the kind of hope she'd always wanted to give her daughter but never could manage on a waitress's salary. "The scholarship covers 4 years of college," James continued, his words falling like gentle rain on parched earth. "Books, housing, everything. All we ask is that recipients maintain their grades and participate in community service projects." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she held the brochure. "But there must be so many people applying, I couldn't possibly—" "You absolutely could," James interrupted firmly. "I've seen your report cards, young lady. Straight A's despite working that part-time job at the library. And more importantly, I've seen your heart." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "When your mother found my wallet, you were the one who reminded her about my credit cards needing to be canceled quickly. You think about others, even in small ways. That's exactly what we're looking for." Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. She tried to speak, but emotion closed her throat. James noticed and reached across to pat her hand. "No child's future should be limited by money," he said softly, "especially not one as bright as Emily." Emily looked up from the brochure, her eyes shining. When can I apply?" "Applications open next month," James replied. "And I'll help you with every step. Essays, recommendations, whatever you need." Clara finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you." James shook his head, his expression gentle but firm. "Don't thank me. Emily's earned this opportunity through her own merit. I'm just opening a door, she's the one who'll walk through it." Emily jumped up from her chair, the brochure clutched to her chest. She rushed to her mother's side, throwing her arms around Clara's shoulders. "Mom!" she exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom, do you know what this means?" Clara held her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the trembling excitement in Emily's slim frame. Years of worry about Emily's future, sleepless nights wondering how she'd ever afford college, trying to figure out how to make a waitress's tips stretch far enough to give her daughter a chance, began to melt away. Emily pulled back slightly, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her mother. "See?" she whispered, her voice full of joy and wonder. "God answered your prayers." Clara couldn't hold back her own tears any longer. They spilled down her cheeks as she hugged Emily tighter, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. James watched from his chair, his own eyes suspiciously bright. The moment stretched out, warm and precious, filled with the kind of hope Clara had almost forgotten how to feel. Through her tears, she caught James's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." He simply nodded, his smile saying more than words ever could. Emily clutched the brochure like it was made of gold, her other arm still wrapped around her mother's shoulders. The setting sun streamed through James's study windows, painting them all in warm light, while outside, the first stars of evening began to appear in the darkening sky. The morning rush at Sally's diner brought the usual clatter of plates and hum of conversation. Clara moved between tables with practiced ease, her coffee pot a constant companion. The familiar scent of bacon and pancakes filled the air, mixing with the sharp aroma of fresh coffee. "More coffee, Mrs. Henderson?" Clara asked, already tilting the pot toward the elderly woman's cup. Mrs. Henderson beamed up at her. "Yes, dear. And may I say, it's wonderful what Judge Whitaker's doing for you and Emily. Such a blessing to see good things happening to good people." Clara's cheeks warmed as she poured. "Thank you, but really, we're just friends. He's been very kind to us." Behind her, she heard whispers from the booth where 3 regular customers sat, local business owners who always came in for their morning meeting. Their voices weren't quite quiet enough, taking advantage of his generosity, probably after his money. Always the quiet ones you have to watch. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she finished pouring Mrs. Henderson's coffee. The whispers felt like tiny needles pricking her skin. She straightened her spine and moved to the next table, determined not to let them see how much their words hurt. "Order up!" Joe, the cook, called from the kitchen window. Clara grabbed the plates, grateful for the distraction. As she delivered them to a young couple by the window, she noticed more sideways glances, more hushed conversations. The diner had always been her safe place. For 6 years, she'd served these people, learned their usual orders, celebrated their birthdays, and consoled them through losses. Now the familiar space felt different, charged with unspoken judgments. During a brief lull, Clara ducked into the break room to catch her breath. She found Jenny, another waitress, already there, stirring sugar into her tea with unusual concentration. "Hey," Jenny said, not quite meeting Clara's eyes. "Can we talk for a minute?" Clara's stomach tightened. "Sure. What's up?" Jenny set her spoon down carefully. "I thought you should know. I was at Murphy's bar last night. Daniel Whitaker was there with some business associates." She hesitated, twisting her hands together. "He was talking about you. Not nice things." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too harsh. Clara sank onto the worn break room couch. "What kind of things?" "He was saying how you've manipulated his father, how you're just after the judge's money." Jenny's voice grew softer. "Said you're playing the poor single mother card to get sympathy. Called you well, I won't repeat it, but it wasn't nice." Clara's chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing all the air out of her lungs. "Jenny, you know that's not true. I never asked James for anything. He's the one who—" "I know," Jenny interrupted, finally meeting Clara's eyes. "We've worked together for years. I know you're not like that. But Clara, Daniel Whitaker has influence in this town. People listen to him." Through the break room door, Clara could hear the murmur of diner conversation. How many of those voices were discussing her? How many people believed Daniel's lies? "Thanks for telling me," Clara managed to say, pushing herself up from the couch. Her uniform felt too tight, too scratchy against her skin. Back on the floor, the whispers seemed louder. Mrs. Peterson, who usually chatted with Clara about her grandchildren, barely looked up from her menu. Mr. Collins, a regular who always joked with her, suddenly became very interested in his phone when she approached his table. "Coffee's fresh," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady as she worked her way around the diner. Some customers still smiled at her, still treated her normally, but others. The bell above the door chimed as Pastor Roberts from James's church entered with his wife. They usually sat in Clara's section, but today they chose a booth in Jenny's area. The rejection stung like a slap. By the time her shift ended, Clara felt raw, exposed. She changed out of her uniform with shaking hands, trying to hold back tears. In the employee parking lot, she sat in her car for several long minutes, gripping the steering wheel. What would these rumors do to Emily? Her daughter was so proud of their friendship with James, so excited about the scholarship possibility. Would other kids at school start whispering too? Would their teachers look at Emily differently? Clara started the car, the engine's rattle matching her nerves. The drive home felt longer than usual, each traffic light an eternity. Every face in every passing car seemed to be judging her, even though she knew that was impossible. She pulled into their driveway, noticing Mrs. Garcia next door, quickly turning away from her window. Even here, in her own neighborhood, the whispers had reached. Clara sat in the car, watching the afternoon shadows stretch across the yard, feeling more alone than she had in years. Emily would be home from school soon. Clara would have to find the strength to smile, to pretend everything was fine. But how long could she protect her daughter from the cruel words spreading through their small town? How long before Daniel's influence turned their community completely against them? With a deep breath, Clara grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. Her shoes crunched on the gravel driveway as she walked toward their front door, each step heavy with the weight of the day's revelations. The old church bells chimed across the town square as Clara helped Emily adjust the collar of her pale blue dress. It was their best outfit, saved for special occasions, and today certainly qualified. Judge James Whitaker had personally invited them to attend a service where the congregation would honor his decades of service to justice and civil rights. "Do I look okay?" Emily asked, fidgeting with her hair. Clara smoothed a wayward strand from her daughter's forehead. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." They climbed the worn stone steps of First Methodist, where James waited at the entrance. His face lit up at their arrival. He wore a distinguished charcoal suit, and his silver cufflinks caught the morning sun. "My two favorite ladies," he said warmly, extending both arms to welcome them. "I'm so glad you could make it." Inside, the sanctuary glowed with filtered sunlight through stained glass windows. Wooden pews, polished by generations of faithful attendants, filled quickly as the congregation gathered. Clara noticed several curious glances their way as James led them to a reserved front pew. "These seats are for family," he whispered with a wink. The service began with familiar hymns, the organ's deep notes reverberating through the chapel. Clara found herself relaxing into the peaceful atmosphere. Emily's shoulder pressed against hers as they shared a hymnal. Pastor Matthews stepped to the pulpit, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "Today, we honor a man who has dedicated his life to justice, to mercy, and to walking humbly with God. Judge James Whitaker has been a pillar of our community for over 40 years. As the pastor continued listing James's accomplishments, Clara noticed movement at the back of the church. Her heart skipped when she recognized Daniel Whitaker slipping into a rear pew. His expression was unreadable, but his stiff posture spoke volumes. The pastor invited James to speak, and the elderly judge made his way to the front with dignified steps. He adjusted his glasses, looking out over the congregation with genuine warmth. "When we speak of justice," James began, "we often think of courtrooms and legal decisions. But true justice happens in small moments, in daily choices that reveal a person's character." His eyes found Clara's, and she felt her cheeks warm. "Just recently, I experienced such a moment of justice and integrity. A hard-working mother found my wallet full of cash that could have eased her own burdens. Instead of keeping it, she tracked me down to return it." James's voice grew tender. "Clara Thompson showed me that honesty still exists, that goodness still prevails, even when times are hard." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Clara felt dozens of eyes turned toward her, but it wasn't the uncomfortable scrutiny she'd feared. There was something like respect in their gazes, even admiration. Clara reminds us that character isn't measured by what we have, but by what we choose to do when no one is watching. James's words rang with conviction. "She and her remarkable daughter Emily have become dear to me, showing me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the bonds we choose to honor." Emily squeezed Clara's hand tight. Clara blinked back tears, overwhelmed by James's public acknowledgement. She caught a glimpse of Daniel in the back, his jaw clenched, hands gripping the pew in front of him. After the service, people gathered in the church courtyard for coffee and conversation. Several congregation members approached Clara, offering kind words and warm handshakes. Mrs. Peterson from the choir insisted Emily must join their youth group. Mr. Harrison, who owned the hardware store, mentioned he might have a better-paying job opening soon. Clara felt lighter than she had in months, surrounded by genuine acceptance rather than judgment. Emily chatted animatedly with some teenagers from the youth group, her usual shyness forgotten in the welcoming atmosphere. The moment shattered when a firm hand gripped Clara's elbow. "A word." Daniel's voice was low but forceful as he steered her toward a quiet corner of the courtyard. They stopped beneath an old oak tree, far enough from the crowd that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Daniel's expensive suit and carefully styled hair contrasted sharply with the ancient bark behind him. "Whatever game you're playing with, my father needs to stop," he said, each word precise and cold. Clara stood straighter, refusing to be intimidated. "There's no game, Mr. Whitaker." "Really?" His laugh held no humor. A struggling waitress just happens to find his wallet? Just happens to return it, knowing who he is? And now you're here every Sunday working your way into his good graces? Your father offered us friendship, Clara replied quietly. That's all. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Listen carefully, Miss Thompson. My father is an old man with a generous heart and poor judgment. He sees what he wants to see. But I see you clearly. You see what you want to see, Clara countered, surprising herself with her steadiness. You see schemes and manipulation because that's what you understand. Your father sees goodness because he chooses to believe in it. A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw. Stay away from him. This is your only warning. I won't let you take advantage of his kindness. The only person hurting your father is you, Clara said softly. She turned away, walking back toward the crowd where Emily's laughter rang out clear and bright. Behind her, Daniel called out, You have no idea what you're dealing with. Clara kept walking, her hands trembling slightly, but her head held high. She found Emily chatting with James near the coffee table, both of them grinning over some shared joke. The sight steadied her. James noticed her approach and held out a weathered hand. There you are! Emily was just telling me about her science project. Quite the brilliant young lady you've raised. She takes after her mother, Emily quipped, making James chuckle. Clara accepted James's offered hand, aware of Daniel watching from the shadows of the oak tree. In that moment, she made her choice. No amount of threats could make her deny Emily this connection, this sense of belonging. They had found something precious here, family in its truest sense, and she would not let fear take it away. Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at the official-looking letter that had just arrived. Her hands trembled as she read the words again, hoping somehow they would change. They didn't. The property sale was being accelerated. They now had just 30 days to vacate instead of 60. She pressed her fingers against her temples, fighting back tears. The morning sun streamed through the small window, highlighting the worn linoleum floor and the familiar chips in the counter's edge. This modest house hadn't been much, but it had been their home for 5 years. "Mom?" Emily's voice came from the hallway. "What's wrong?" Clara quickly wiped her eyes, but Emily had already seen. Her daughter rushed over, reading the letter over her mother's shoulder. The teenager's face fell as she understood. "Daniel's doing this on purpose, isn't he?" Emily's voice cracked. "Because we're friends with his dad?" Clara pulled her daughter close. "We don't know that for sure, honey. These things happen sometimes with property sales." But they both knew better. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. Emily pulled away, her eyes fierce. "Then let's fight it. Judge James will help us. Emily," Clara cut in gently. "We can't keep depending on James to solve our problems. Maybe." She took a deep breath, hating the words even as she spoke them. "Maybe we should look at moving to another town. Start fresh." "No!" Emily's outburst echoed through the small kitchen. "We can't leave. What about my scholarship chance? What about James? He's like family now." Clara stood up and began pacing the kitchen, her waitress uniform hanging ready for her afternoon shift. "I know, sweetheart, but we might not have a choice. There aren't many rentals available in town right now, and what is available?" She trailed off, knowing they couldn't afford the higher rents. Emily slumped into a chair, tears streaming down her face. It's not fair. Everything was finally getting better. Clara's heart ached, watching her daughter's dreams crumble. The scholarship program through James's church foundation had been Emily's first real shot at college. They'd been planning to submit the application next week. The morning dragged on heavily. Clara tried to focus on making breakfast, but the eggs stuck to the pan, and the toast burned. Emily picked at her food in silence, a far cry from her usual morning chatter. "I have to get ready for work," Clara finally said, clearing the barely touched plates. Emily looked up, her eyes red. "Can we at least talk to James first? Please?" Clara hesitated. She'd been trying to stand on her own 2 feet, to not burden the kind judge with more of their problems. But seeing the desperation in her daughter's face broke her resolve. "Okay," she agreed softly. "I'll stop by his house before my shift." The drive to James's house felt longer than usual. Clara gripped the steering wheel tightly, rehearsing what she would say. How could she explain that despite his generosity, despite everything, they might have to leave? James's house looked welcoming as ever, with its wraparound porch and well-tended garden. Clara noticed new flowers had been planted. Emily had helped with that last weekend, she remembered with a pang. She knocked on the door, and James answered quickly, as if he'd been expecting someone. His face creased with concern when he saw her expression. "Clara? What's wrong?" She wordlessly handed him the letter. He adjusted his reading glasses and scanned it, his frown deepening with each line. "Come inside," he said firmly, holding the door wider. Clara followed him to his study, where law books lined the walls and family photos watched from every surface. She settled into the familiar leather chair across from his desk, feeling both comfort and guilt in its embrace. "Daniel is behind this," James stated, not a question but a fact. He set the letter down with controlled anger. "He's trying to force your hand." "I don't know what to do," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily's devastated about leaving, but I can't see any other way. There's nothing available in our price range, and I can't—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I can't keep asking you for help." James leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "Clara Thompson, listen to me carefully. You and Emily are not leaving this town. But," he held up a hand, "no, I won't let my son's bitterness destroy what you and Emily have built here. Your daughter has a real chance at that scholarship. You have support in this community. And his voice softened. "I've come to think of you both as family." Clara felt tears threatening again. "We feel the same way, James. But what can we do? Daniel owns the property, and he's made it clear he won't change his mind." James sat back in his chair, a determined look crossing his face. "I have a plan. It's something I've been considering for a while now, but I needed to be sure." He met her eyes steadily. "And I am sure. About both of you." "What kind of plan?" Clara asked, hope and anxiety warring in her chest. "Let me handle the details for now," James said, his voice gentle but firm. "Just know that I won't let you and Emily be cast out. You have my word on that." James's study was a warm sanctuary from the winter chill outside. Dark wooden bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound law books and family photos. Clara perched nervously on the edge of an aged leather armchair, while James settled behind his massive oak desk, his movements slower than usual. "Clara," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "I need to tell you something important." He pulled out a manila envelope from his desk drawer, handling it with careful deliberation. "I've made some changes to my will." Clara's stomach tightened. She didn't like where this conversation was heading. "This house," James continued, gesturing to the walls around them, "has been in my family for 3 generations. It's seen a lot of history, both good and bad, and now, I've decided that after I'm gone, it should go to you and Emily." "What?" Clara shot up from her chair, her face flushing. "No, James, absolutely not." James held up his hand, the same way he must have done countless times in his courtroom to quiet an outburst. "Please, sit down and hear me out." Clara sank back into the chair, her hands gripping the armrests. "This isn't right. People will think what they want to think," James interrupted, his dark eyes intense. "They always have. When I became the first black judge in this county, people talked. When I ruled against powerful men in my courtroom, people talked. But what matters isn't what people say, it's doing what's right." "But this isn't right," Clara protested, her voice cracking. "I came to return your wallet, not to take advantage of your kindness." James leaned forward, resting his weathered hands on the desk. "Clara Thompson, in all my years on the bench, I learned to read people. Your integrity isn't an act. You've shown me more genuine character in a few weeks than most people do in a lifetime." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I can't accept this. What about Daniel? He's your son." "Daniel," James sighed heavily, "has more wealth than he knows what to do with. He owns half the properties in town, but somewhere along the way, he lost sight of what truly matters." He patted the envelope. "This isn't about money or property, it's about legacy. about ensuring that kindness and honesty still mean something in this world. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't want to come between you and your son. You aren't," James said firmly. "That distance was there long before you came along. Maybe," he paused, looking at an old photo on his desk of a much younger Daniel. "Maybe this will help him remember who he used to be." Standing up, James walked around the desk and placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. "I need you to promise me something." Clara looked up at him, seeing the earnestness in his face. "Promise me you won't leave town. Emily has a real chance at that scholarship and you've become," he smiled warmly. "Well, you and Emily have become family to me." Clara's chest felt tight. The thought of James considering them family made her heart ache with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She thought of Emily's excitement about the scholarship, about the friendships they'd built at church, about the way James had given them both a sense of belonging they'd been missing for so long. "I promise," she whispered, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "But James, when Daniel finds out about this—" "Let me handle Daniel," James said, his voice carrying the authority of his judicial days. "You just keep doing what you've been doing, being a good mother, working hard, showing this town what real integrity looks like." Clara nodded, but couldn't shake the cold dread settling in her bones. She knew Daniel's anger wouldn't be easily dismissed. The man who had coldly accelerated their eviction notice wouldn't take this news lightly. James must have sensed her fear because he squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Trust in God's plan, Clara. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." Clara managed a weak smile, but her mind was already racing with worry. She could picture Daniel's face when he learned about the will, could almost hear the accusations he would hurl. The thought made her want to run, to protect Emily from the storm that was surely coming. But she had made a promise, and if James had taught her anything, it was that promises mattered. So she would stay, would face whatever came next, would trust that somehow God would see them through. As she left James's study that evening, the weight of his gift felt heavier than any burden she'd carried before. The old house seemed to watch her go, its windows like knowing eyes, its future now inexplicably tied to her own. Emily was waiting in the car outside, homework spread across her lap, completely unaware of how their lives had just shifted again. Clara paused at the front door, her hand on the knob, and took a deep breath. The dread in her stomach wouldn't go away, but she straightened her shoulders anyway. She had faced hard times before. She would face this too, whatever came next. The Sunday morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of First Methodist Church, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Clara sat next to Emily in their usual spot, 3 rows behind James. The familiar scent of old hymnals and lemon polish filled the air as the congregation settled in for the service. Clara smoothed her simple blue dress, the nicest one she owned, and tried to focus on Pastor Matthew's sermon about forgiveness. But her mind kept drifting to James's unexpected gift. The weight of his generosity pressed heavily on her conscience. Emily leaned against her mother's shoulder, humming along with the choir. Clara drew strength from her daughter's peaceful presence. At least here, in this sacred space, she could find moments of calm amid her worries. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary creaked open. Clara didn't turn around at first. Latecomers weren't unusual, but a ripple of whispers spread through the congregation, and she felt the atmosphere shift. Daniel Whitaker strode down the center aisle, his expensive suit stark against the modest Sunday clothes of the congregation. His face was set in hard lines, his eyes locked on Clara. She felt her chest tighten as he passed their pew without acknowledgement. Instead of joining his father in the front row, Daniel turned to face the congregation. He cleared his throat loudly, interrupting Pastor Matthew's mid-sentence. "I apologize for the interruption," Daniel announced, his voice filling the sanctuary. "But there's something this congregation needs to know." His words carried the weight of barely contained anger. James half rose from his seat. "Daniel, this isn't the place." "No, Father. This is exactly the place." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he pointed at Clara. "That woman has manipulated her way into my father's life and his will." Gasps echoed through the sanctuary. Clara felt the blood drain from her face as dozens of eyes turned to stare at her. She pretended to be honest by returning his wallet, Daniel continued, his voice rising. "But it was all calculated. She used her daughter to play on his sympathies. And now she's convinced him to leave her his house, our family home." Emily grabbed Clara's hand. "That's not true," she cried out, but her young voice was lost in the growing murmurs. "I trusted you," Daniel said, his words cutting through the whispers. "We all trusted you, but you're nothing but a gold digger taking advantage of a lonely old man." Clara's vision blurred with tears. The faces around her, people who had welcomed her, praised her honesty, now wore expressions of shock and judgment. Mrs. Peterson, who had just last week invited her to join the church committee, turned away. Mr. Johnson, who always requested her section at the diner, shook his head in disappointment. "I never—" Clara tried to speak, but her voice cracked. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers growing louder, more accusatory. James's voice boomed from the front pew. "How dare you!" He struggled to his feet, face contorted with anger. "Clara has shown nothing but integrity." But his words cut off as he stumbled, catching himself on the pew. Emily leaped up and rushed to help him, shooting a hurt look at Daniel. Clara couldn't breathe. She couldn't bear to see James collapse, to feel the weight of everyone's judgment, to watch her daughter trying to hold everything together. With trembling hands, she grabbed her purse and fled down the aisle. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor behind her. "Running away proves your guilt," Daniel called after her. Clara burst through the church doors into the parking lot, gasping for air. The sun was too bright, too harsh. Her legs carried her to her old car, where she fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Inside, she gripped the steering wheel and finally let the sobs come. Everything they had built here, the friendship with James, the scholarship possibility for Emily, the respect of the congregation, lay in ruins. How could she face any of them again? How could she walk into the diner tomorrow, knowing what everyone thought of her? Worst of all was the knowledge that James might doubt her now too. The memory of his face as he collapsed, the hurt and anger there, was some of that directed at her? Did he wonder if Daniel was right? Through her tears, Clara watched people beginning to exit the church. She couldn't face them. Not now. Maybe not ever again. She started the car with shaking hands, her world crumbling around her as she pulled out of the parking lot, leaving behind the only place that had felt like home in years. The morning after the church incident, Clara's hands trembled as she poured coffee for customers at Jerry's diner. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from a sleepless night. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she flinched, half expecting to see Daniel's stern face or worried church members coming to whisper about Sunday's scandal. "More coffee, hon?" she asked an elderly regular, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The woman studied her face with concern but said nothing as Clara topped off her cup. Back in the kitchen, Clara picked up another double-shift ticket. She had been taking every extra hour available, desperately trying to build up some savings before they lost their home. The physical exhaustion was almost welcome. It helped drown out the shame that burned in her chest whenever she thought about James and the congregation's shocked faces. At home, Emily watched her mother's withdrawn silence with growing worry. "Mom, Judge James asked about you again today," she said one evening, setting her backpack down after school. "He misses you." Clara kept folding laundry, her movements mechanical. "I'm sure he's fine, sweetie. He has plenty of other friends." "But he's not fine," Emily insisted, pulling out her homework. "He seems sadder every time I visit. And his cough is getting worse." Clara's hands stilled on a faded t-shirt. The thought of James' suffering made her heart ache. But shame held her back like iron chains. I can't face him right now, Emily. Not after everything that happened. It wasn't your fault. Daniel was the one who—" "Please," Clara cut her off gently. "Let's not talk about it anymore." The days blurred together in a haze of coffee pots, dinner orders, and careful budgeting at the kitchen table late at night. Clara took comfort in the simple routine of work, even as exhaustion settled deep in her bones. She avoided the grocery store where she'd found James's wallet, took different routes home to bypass his street, and stayed away from their usual Sunday service. Emily, however, refused to let the connection break completely. Every few days after school, she would stop by James's house, often bringing him cookies she'd baked or helping organize his massive library. She never told her mother, but sometimes she would just sit and listen as James shared stories about his years on the bench, fighting for justice in a world that didn't always want to give it. Across town, in his sleek corner office, Daniel Whitaker found himself distracted from work. The satisfaction he'd felt at exposing Clara's true nature had curdled into something unsettling. He caught himself staring at old family photos on his desk, particularly one of his mother, gone too soon, whose gentle smile reminded him of simpler times. His secretary buzzed in. "Your father's nurse called again. He's refusing to take his medication." Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tell her to handle it. She says he's asking for Clara." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel dismissed the secretary with a wave, but the hollow feeling in his chest grew. He remembered the look in Clara's eyes as she'd fled the church, not calculating or manipulative, but deeply wounded. It wasn't the look of someone who had been caught in a scheme. It was the look of someone whose trust had been shattered. Late one afternoon, Emily sat in James's study, pretending to read while actually watching him struggle with a coughing fit. When it passed, he pulled out his old fountain pen and a sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery. "Emily," he said, his voice rough but warm, "would you do me a favor?" She set down her book immediately. "Of course!" James began to write, his elegant script flowing across the page. "Your mother taught you about doing what's right, even when it's hard. My son, he used to know that too." He paused, pressing a hand to his chest. "Sometimes we need reminding of who we really are." Emily waited patiently as James filled both sides of the paper. When he finished, he folded it carefully and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Daniel. "Would you make sure he gets this?" James asked, holding out the letter. "Sometimes a father's words mean more when they come through gentle hands." Emily took the envelope reverently, understanding the weight of trust he was placing in her. "I'll deliver it today, I promise." As she left James's house, tucking the letter safely in her backpack, Emily glanced back at the window where James stood watching. His tall frame seemed smaller somehow, bent by more than just age. She squared her shoulders, determined to help heal the rift that had grown between all the people she had come to care about. The letter felt like it was burning a hole in her backpack as she headed toward Daniel's office building, hoping to catch him before he left for the day. She carried not just paper and ink, but the weight of James's love, Clara's dignity, and her own fierce hope that sometimes, just sometimes, broken things could be made whole again. Daniel Whitaker sat behind his mahogany desk, his usual confident posture absent. The letter in his hands trembled slightly. His father's familiar handwriting covered the first page, but it was the second page that made his throat tight, a yellowed piece of paper with his mother's delicate script. The late afternoon sun stretched shadows across his corner office. Family photos lined the shelves, carefully arranged to project success, but conspicuously missing any recent pictures with his father. The city skyline beyond his window had always made him feel powerful. Today, it just made him feel alone. He smoothed the old paper with shaking fingers. The date at the top caught his eye, just weeks before his mother passed away when he was 12. Her writing was already becoming unsteady from her illness, but her words remained strong. "My dearest James, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to help guide our Daniel. He's so much like you, determined, brilliant, driven, but I see something else growing in him that worries me. There's an anger, a need to prove himself, that's turning his heart hard. Please help him remember that true strength isn't about power or control. It's about having the courage to be compassionate. I know losing me will be hard on him. Don't let him use that pain as an excuse to shut out love. Remind him how we used to sit in the garden, and I'd tell him stories about kindness changing the world. Remember how he'd light up when we helped Mrs. Peterson with her groceries? That sweet, caring boy is still inside him. James, promise me you'll help him become the man I know he can be, one who leads with his heart as much as his head. Don't let him forget that real success isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch. All my love, Margaret." Daniel's chest tightened as memories washed over him. The garden his mother loved so much, filled with roses and hope. Her gentle hands guiding his as they planted seeds together. The way she'd stop to help anyone in need, no matter how busy they were. He remembered the day she first got sick, how he'd prayed she'd get better, made deals with God, promised to be perfect if she'd just stay. When she died, he'd locked those memories away, buried them under spreadsheets and profit margins. It was easier to focus on things he could control. The tissue box on his desk, usually just for show, suddenly served its purpose as he wiped his eyes. His gaze fell on a small photo he kept in his bottom drawer, him at 11, sitting with his mother on their porch swing. Her arm was around him, and they were both laughing at something long forgotten. "Oh, Mom," he whispered, touching the photo gently. "What would you think of me now?" He thought of Clara, her quiet dignity as she'd returned his father's wallet, her refusal to take advantage of the situation. She'd shown the same kind of integrity his mother had valued so deeply. And how had he repaid that? By publicly humiliating her, by threatening to make her homeless, by letting his suspicious nature override any chance of seeing her true character. Standing up, Daniel walked to his window. The city below buzzed with afternoon traffic, people rushing home to their families. He remembered his father's words during their last argument. "Your mother would be heartbroken to see how you've forgotten what matters most." He'd dismissed it then as emotional manipulation. Now, holding his mother's letter, those words cut deep. The empire he'd built, the power he'd accumulated, none of it filled the emptiness he'd been carrying since losing her. His reflection in the window showed a successful businessman, exactly what he'd always wanted to be, but his mother's words echoed in his mind. "Real success isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch." Looking down at the letter again, Daniel felt something crack inside him, the protective shell he'd built around his heart all those years ago. His mother had seen it coming, had tried to prevent it even from beyond the grave. And his father, despite their differences, had been trying to honor her wishes all along. Sinking back into his chair, Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time in decades, he let himself really feel the loss of his mother, not as an excuse to be hard, but as a reminder of everything she'd tried to teach him. The weight of his recent actions pressed down on him, his cruelty to Clara, his stubborn rejection of his father's wisdom, his refusal to see beyond his own narrow definition of success. The truth he'd been avoiding crashed over him like a wave. He had become exactly what his mother had feared, a man so focused on protecting himself from hurt that he'd forgotten how to show compassion. The realization stuck in his throat like a stone. He had been wrong. Terribly, painfully wrong. Carefully folding his mother's letter, Daniel placed it in his breast pocket, close to his heart where it belonged. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, his mother's favorite time of day. She used to say, it was when magic happened, when hearts could soften and change. As darkness settled over the city, Daniel sat in his dimmed office, his carefully constructed worldview crumbling around him. The admission he'd been fighting rose up inside him, impossible to ignore any longer. He had been wrong about Clara, wrong about his father, wrong about what truly mattered in life. The evening air hung heavy with the scent of coming rain, as Clara stood at her kitchen sink, mechanically washing dishes. Emily sat at the small table behind her, textbook open but forgotten as she watched her mother's tense shoulders. They hadn't spoken much since the church incident, both carrying the weight of whispered judgments and sideways glances. A sharp knock at the door made Clara jump, sending soap bubbles flying. She quickly wiped her hands on her worn apron, shooting Emily a worried glance. They weren't expecting anyone, and these days, unexpected visitors usually meant bad news. "I'll get it," Emily offered, but Clara shook her head. "No, honey, stay there." Clara smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. When she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Daniel Whitaker stood on her shabby front porch, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his expensive suit. The streetlight caught the silver in his temples, and for the first time, Clara noticed how much he resembled his father around the eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. May I speak with you for a moment?" Clara's first instinct was to shut the door, but something in his expression, a vulnerability she'd never seen before, made her hesitate. "I don't think that's a good idea, Mr. Whitaker. Please." The words seemed to cost him something. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. From the kitchen, Emily called out, "Mom, let him in." Clara closed her eyes briefly, knowing her daughter's forgiving heart would win out. 5 minutes, Clara agreed, stepping back to let him enter. Daniel stood awkwardly in their small living room, looking out of place among the second-hand furniture, and carefully, the old grandfather clock in James's study ticked steadily as Daniel stood in the doorway, his usual confident posture replaced by hesitation. His father sat in his favorite leather armchair, looking smaller and more fragile than Daniel remembered, a worn quilt draped across his lap despite the warmth of the evening. "Come in, son," James said softly, his voice carrying the weight of years but tinged with hope. The evening sun filtered through the study's windows, casting long shadows across the room's wood-paneled walls and countless books. Daniel moved forward, his expensive shoes silent on the Persian rug. He perched awkwardly on the edge of the ottoman near his father's feet, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The letter from his mother sat folded in his breast pocket, its presence like a gentle weight against his heart. "I read Mom's letter," Daniel began, his voice rough with emotion. He cleared his throat, struggling to maintain his composure. "All these years I thought you were disappointed in me for choosing business over law." James shook his head slowly, pain evident in his dark eyes. "No, son. I was never disappointed in your choice of career. I was worried about what that career was doing to your heart." Daniel's shoulders slumped as the carefully constructed walls around his emotions began to crack. "I've been so blind, Dad. So caught up in proving myself, in building something impressive, that I forgot everything Mom taught me about kindness." His voice broke on the last word. James leaned forward, placing a weathered hand on his son's knee. "Your mother would be proud of your success, Daniel, but she'd want that success to lift others up, not push them down." "Like Clara," Daniel whispered, shame coloring his face. "I treated her terribly. I was so convinced she was taking advantage of you that I couldn't see what was right in front of me, her integrity, her strength." "Clara Thompson," James said, a smile warming his features, "is exactly the kind of person your mother would have championed. A woman fighting against odds, never compromising her principles, putting her child first." Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the familiar study. His fingers brushed the spines of law books he'd studied as a child, sitting at his father's feet. "I was jealous," he admitted, the words bitter in his mouth. "When I heard you'd written her into your will, all I could think was that you'd found someone else to be proud of, someone to replace me." "Oh, Daniel." James's voice cracked with emotion. "No one could ever replace you. You're my son, my only child. Including Clara and Emily in my will wasn't about replacing you. It was about expanding our family circle, about helping good people who deserve a chance." Daniel turned back to his father, tears gathering in his eyes. "Can you forgive me, Dad? For everything? For pushing you away all these years? For becoming so hard-hearted? For humiliating Clara in church?" James pushed himself to his feet, wavering slightly, until Daniel rushed to steady him. The older man wrapped his arms around his son, and Daniel found himself clinging to his father like he hadn't done since he was a small boy. "I forgive you," James whispered fiercely. "I've always forgiven you." But Daniel, he pulled back, holding his son at arm's length, his gaze intense. "Forgiveness is just the beginning. True change requires action, not just words." Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know. I need to make things right with Clara first. The way I treated her, the things I said." "She has a forgiving heart," James said, lowering himself back into his chair. "But she's also been hurt deeply by life. You'll need to prove yourself trustworthy." "I will," Daniel promised, his voice firm with newfound resolve. "I'll start by ensuring she and Emily can stay in their home. I'll make the arrangements tomorrow." James smiled, but his expression remained serious. "That's a good start, but remember, Clara values her independence and dignity. Don't try to sweep in like a fairy godfather with grand gestures. She needs respect more than charity." Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair, nodding thoughtfully. "I understand. I'll find a way to help that preserves her dignity." He glanced at his watch and straightened his shoulders. I should go see her now, while I have the courage. James reached for his son's hand, squeezing it gently. You're more like your mother than you know, Daniel. She'd be proud to see you choosing love over fear. Daniel's throat tightened at his father's words. He bent down to hug James one more time, inhaling the familiar scent of old books and pipe tobacco that had always meant home and safety in his childhood. I love you, Dad, he said softly. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my way back. Love you too, son, James replied, his voice thick with emotion. Now go. Make things right. Daniel walked to the study door, pausing in the doorframe to look back at his father. James sat quietly in his chair, the evening sun painting him in warm gold, a peaceful smile on his face. For the first time in years, Daniel felt truly worthy of being this good man's son. With renewed purpose, he headed for his car. It was time to face Clara and begin making amends for all the pain he'd caused. His mother's letter crinkled in his pocket as he walked, reminding him that it was never too late to choose a better path. The church hall buzzed with activity as people gathered for the scholarship fundraiser. Folding chairs lined the room in neat rows, and hand-painted banners celebrating education hung from the walls. The sweet scent of punch and cookies wafted from a long table at the back, where elderly church ladies fussed over the arrangement of paper plates and napkins. Clara stood near the entrance, tugging nervously at the sleeve of her best blue dress. Emily squeezed her hand and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. We don't have to stay long." James sat in the front row, looking tired but pleased as he watched people file in. His eyes lit up when he spotted Clara, and he raised a frail hand in greeting. Several members of the congregation nodded politely as they passed, though some still averted their eyes. The whispers that had haunted Clara these past weeks seemed to hover in the air like invisible smoke. "There's still time to leave," Clara murmured to Emily, but her daughter gave her a gentle push forward. "We're staying," Emily insisted. "Judge James needs us here." They found seats halfway back. Clara's hands clasped tightly in her lap. The pastor stepped up to the podium, tapping the microphone. The feedback made everyone wince. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice warm and steady. "We're here tonight to support our youth scholarship program, which has helped dozens of promising students over the years." Clara tried to focus on his words, but her attention kept drifting to the door. Each time it opened, her heart jumped, expecting Daniel to walk in. Part of her hoped he wouldn't show up at all. The pastor's introduction continued, highlighting past scholarship recipients and their achievements. Emily sat up straighter when he mentioned this year's candidates. Clara managed a small smile, proud, despite her anxiety. Then the door opened one final time, and Daniel stepped in. He looked different somehow, less rigid, more human. His usual impeccable suit seemed to sit less comfortably on his shoulders. He carried a leather portfolio and nodded briefly to several people as he made his way to the front. Clara's throat tightened. Emily reached over and gripped her hand again. The pastor's voice took on a more serious tone. "Before we continue with our fundraising goals, Mr. Daniel Whitaker has asked to say a few words." A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel stepped up to the podium, placing his portfolio on its surface. He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the room until they found Clara. "Good evening," he began, his voice less commanding than usual. "Many of you know me as a businessman, as Judge Whitaker's son. Some of you might know me as someone who," he paused, swallowing hard, "who recently behaved in a way that brought shame to this community and pain to good people." The room fell completely silent. Clara felt the weight of every eye shifting between her and Daniel. "A few weeks ago, in this very building, I publicly accused Clara Thompson of taking advantage of my father's kindness. I let fear and old hurts cloud my judgment. I was wrong." His words hung in the air. Clara's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "Clara Thompson isn't who I thought she was. When she found my father's wallet full of cash, she could have kept it. Many would have. Instead, she tracked him down to return it, refusing any reward. She showed integrity when facing hardship, grace when facing cruelty. My cruelty." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. He gripped the edges of the podium, steadying himself. My mother once wrote that a person's true character shows in how they treat others when they have nothing to gain. Clara Thompson has shown her character time and again. My father saw it immediately. I was too blind to see it myself. He opened his portfolio and pulled out a document. To begin making amends, I've arranged for Clara and Emily Thompson to remain in their home indefinitely, with rent fixed at an amount they can manage. It's not charity, it's justice. It's what should have been done from the start. Applause erupted, starting slowly then building to a thunderous level. Emily threw her arms around Clara, who sat stunned, tears flowing freely now. Several people nearby reached out to touch her shoulders supportively. When the applause died down, Daniel stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Clara's row. The entire congregation watched as he stopped in front of her. "Clara," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity, "I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you and your daughter. Can you forgive me?" Clara stood slowly, aware of the hundreds of eyes watching. She thought of James, of his decades fighting for justice, of his ability to maintain compassion, even in the face of hatred. She thought of all he had taught her about grace. Through her tears, she nodded. "Yes," she said clearly. "I forgive you." The applause this time was even louder than before. Emily jumped up to hug them both, her face beaming. In the front row, James wiped his eyes with a handkerchief, smiling broadly at the scene before him. Clara's small kitchen hummed with nervous energy as she pulled her mother's old casserole dish from the oven. The ceramic was chipped at the corners, but it still held the warmth of generations of family meals. Emily darted around her, setting their mismatched plates on the dining table with unusual care, making sure each fork lined up perfectly. "Mom, do you think they'll mind that we're using the everyday plates?" Emily whispered, tugging at the tablecloth to straighten it for the 10th time. Clara smiled, touching her daughter's shoulder. "Judge Whittaker isn't the kind of man who cares about fancy dishes, sweetie." And Daniel. She paused, still getting used to thinking of him differently. "Well, he's learning what really matters." The doorbell chimed and Emily nearly jumped. Clara smoothed her simple dress and took a deep breath. When she opened the door, James stood there with his warm smile, leaning slightly on his cane. Daniel stood behind him, holding a bouquet of yellow daisies and looking almost as nervous as Clara felt. "We brought flowers," Daniel said, extending them awkwardly. "Emily mentioned they're your favorite." Clara's eyes met Emily's, who shrugged with a grin. "Thank you," Clara said softly, accepting the flowers. "Please, come in." James settled into a chair at the table, his eyes twinkling as he watched Emily show Daniel her science textbook. "Look at these diagrams I drew for my project," she was saying, her earlier nervousness forgotten in her enthusiasm. "These are impressive," Daniel said, genuinely interested. "You know, I wanted to be a scientist before I went into real estate." "Really?" Emily's eyes widened. "What happened?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face, but he answered honestly. "Sometimes we let fear guide us away from our dreams. I was afraid of not being successful enough." James cleared his throat. "But success isn't always measured in dollars, is it, son?" "No," Daniel agreed quietly. "I'm learning that now." Clara brought the casserole to the table, along with a bowl of fresh salad. "It's nothing fancy," she apologized, "but it's my grandmother's recipe." "It smells wonderful," James said, helping himself to a generous portion, "just like a home should smell." The first few minutes were filled with the awkward clinking of forks and polite requests to pass the salt. But then Emily dropped her napkin, and when she ducked under the table to retrieve it, she bumped her head with a loud thunk. "Ow!" she exclaimed, emerging red-faced. To everyone's surprise, Daniel burst out laughing, not unkindly, but with genuine amusement. "I did exactly the same thing at my first formal dinner with Mom's family," he shared, "except I knocked over my water glass trying to get up." Emily giggled, rubbing her head. "Really?" "Really. The water went right into Grandfather's lap. He was wearing light gray pants." Soon they were all laughing, the tension broken. James launched into stories about Daniel's childhood mishaps, and Daniel, instead of bristling as he once would have, added his own memories with self-deprecating humor. "Remember when you tried to teach me to ride a bike?" Daniel asked his father, his voice warm with nostalgia. "You were so determined," James recalled. Wouldn't let me hold on even though you kept falling. Some things never change, Daniel admitted ruefully. I'm still learning when to let people help me. Clara watched as Emily hung on every word, her earlier worries about the mismatched plates forgotten. The conversation flowed naturally now, weaving between past and present, serious moments and light ones. James told stories about his early days as a judge, and Clara noticed how Daniel listened with new appreciation. Emily asked questions about their family history, and both men answered with increasing openness. "Your mother would have loved this," James said to Daniel, gesturing to their gathered group. "She always said a table full of honest talk and good food could heal almost anything." Daniel's eyes grew distant for a moment. "She was right about a lot of things," he said softly. As they finished the meal, Emily surprised everyone by pulling out a homemade apple pie. "I made it myself," she announced proudly. "Well, Mom helped with the crust." "It's perfect," Daniel declared after his first bite, and Emily beamed. When the plates were cleared, Clara began to stack dishes in the sink. To her surprise, Daniel rolled up his sleeves and joined her. "Let me help," he said, picking up a dish towel. In the background, they could hear Emily showing James her latest art project in the living room, their voices warm with shared enthusiasm. "Thank you," Clara said quietly as she handed Daniel a wet plate. "Not just for this, but for everything you've done." "I should be thanking you," Daniel replied, carefully drying the dish. "You showed me what real integrity looks like, what family can look like." They worked in comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of running water mixing with distant laughter from the living room. "Emily's a remarkable girl," Daniel observed. "She reminds me of my mother, always seeing the best in people." Clara smiled, passing him another plate. "She makes it easy to have faith in people." From the living room, they heard James's deep chuckle mixing with Emily's bright laughter. The sound wrapped around them like a warm blanket, making the small kitchen feel full of possibility. As Clara handed Daniel the last dish, she closed her eyes briefly, her heart overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered just loud enough for her own ears, "for second chances and new beginnings." The dishes done, they rejoined James and Emily in the living room, where Emily was showing off her scholarship application essays. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting a gentle glow over their small gathering. It wasn't perfect, there were still moments of careful navigation and healing bridges. But it was real, and it was family, in all its unexpected beauty. The autumn sun cast long shadows through James's study windows, painting the room in warm amber light. Clara sat in her usual spot, a worn leather armchair that had become familiar over the past months. James settled into his chair across from her, his movements slower these days but his eyes as bright and wise as ever. "You know, Clara," he began, his voice carrying that gentle authority she'd come to treasure, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened since that cold night you found my wallet." Clara nodded, smoothing her waitress uniform. She'd come straight from her shift, not wanting to miss their afternoon visit. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," she admitted. James leaned forward slightly, his hands folded in his lap. "Life has a way of testing us, doesn't it? Not to break us, mind you, but to show us what we're made of." Clara thought about those desperate days, the unpaid bills, the eviction notice, the humiliation at church. Her chest tightened at the memories. "There were times I wanted to give up," she confessed. "Pack everything and just run." "But you didn't," James reminded her, his smile gentle. "You stood your ground. Even when Daniel was at his worst, you kept your dignity, your integrity." Clara glanced at the photos on his desk. Younger versions of James in his judge's robes, Daniel as a little boy, moments frozen in time. "I just tried to do what was right," she said softly. "For Emily's sake." "And that's exactly why you were the answer to my prayers," James said, causing Clara to look up sharply. "Oh yes, I've prayed for years about Daniel. Watched him build walls around his heart, turn success into armor. But he needed someone to show him what real strength looks like." "Me?" Clara's voice wavered. "But I was just trying to survive." James shook his head, reaching over to pat her hand. "You were doing far more than surviving, Clara. You were showing grace under pressure. When you refused to keep that money, even though you needed it desperately, That spoke volumes. When you faced Daniel's accusations with dignity instead of bitterness, that reached places in him that my words never could. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes as understanding dawned. I never thought about it that way. The greatest lessons often come through the humblest teachers, James continued. You showed Daniel that true character isn't measured by bank accounts or business deals. It's measured by how we treat others when we're hurting ourselves. Clara wiped at her eyes, remembering Daniel's transformation, from the cold-eyed businessman who'd dismissed her to the man who now joined them for family dinners, who helped Emily with her college applications, who was learning to laugh again. You know what Emily told me yesterday? James asked, his eyes twinkling. She said watching you forgive Daniel taught her more about faith than any sermon ever could. Oh, Clara breathed, touched by her daughter's words. She's growing up so wise. Like her mother, James added. Clara, these trials you've faced, they weren't just about keeping a roof over your head. They were about showing others that hope isn't found in circumstances, but in how we choose to face them. Clara thought about the community that had formed around them, the church members who'd stood by her, the customers at the diner who now greeted her like family, and most surprisingly, Daniel, who was slowly learning to open his heart again. I used to pray for escape, she admitted. Now I pray for strength to be whatever God needs me to be for others. James nodded approvingly. That's wisdom, Clara. Real wisdom. Life will always have its trials, but they're not meant to defeat us. They're opportunities to grow, to show others there's always hope, always a way forward if we keep our hearts right. Clara stood up, moved beyond words by his insight. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around James's shoulders, careful not to squeeze too tight. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing more in me than I saw in myself. Just promise me one thing, James said, patting her back. Promise you'll keep carrying these lessons forward. There are others out there who need to see what grace looks like in action. I promise, Clara replied, her voice firm with conviction. She drew back, looking into the eyes of the man who had become like a father to her. I promise. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room windows of Clara's small house, warming the worn but clean furniture. Emily burst through the front door, her backpack swinging wildly, clutching a thick envelope in her hands. Her face glowed with excitement as she waved the paper in the air. Mom! Mom! It came! Emily's voice trembled with joy. Clara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her heart already racing at her daughter's enthusiasm. What came, sweetheart? Clara asked, though the hope blooming in her chest told her exactly what it might be. The scholarship letter. Emily could barely contain herself as she ripped open the envelope with shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned the page, growing wider by the second. I got it, Mom, full scholarship. Clara rushed forward, gathering Emily in her arms. Tears welled in her eyes as she held her daughter close, feeling the paper crinkle between them. All those late nights Emily had spent studying, all the times she'd pushed through exhaustion to maintain her perfect grades, it had paid off. I knew you could do it, Clara whispered into Emily's hair. I'm so proud of you, baby. The doorbell rang, and Emily pulled back, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. That must be Judge James and Daniel. I texted them as soon as I got the letter. Clara opened the door to find James standing there, supported by his cane but beaming with grandfatherly pride. Daniel stood beside him, looking more relaxed than Clara had ever seen him, his usual stern expression replaced by a genuine smile. We heard there was some good news, James said, his eyes twinkling. Emily rushed forward, careful not to knock James off balance as she hugged him. I got it. The Church Foundation scholarship, they're giving me a full ride. James patted her back, his eyes misty. Of course you did. You earned every bit of it with your hard work and character. Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand to Emily in a formal gesture that made her giggle. Congratulations, Emily. That's quite an achievement. His professional demeanor cracked as Emily ignored his hand and gave him a quick hug instead. They moved to the living room, where Clara served fresh lemonade, a special treat she'd been saving for a celebration. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, reading parts of the acceptance letter out loud while everyone listened with proud smiles. Your academic excellence, combined with your demonstrated commitment to community service and strong character references, make you an ideal recipient," Emily read, her voice full of wonder. "I still can't believe it's real." "Believe it," Daniel said, surprising everyone with his warmth. "You've shown remarkable dedication. Any university would be lucky to have you." James nodded in agreement. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways, but sometimes He's quite clear about His plans. Your mother's honest heart led you both to my door, and now look where we are." Emily looked up at Clara, her eyes shining. "Mom, remember when you found Judge James's wallet? You could have kept it. We needed the money so badly then, but you didn't." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the memory. "I did what was right, that's all. That's everything." James corrected gently. "That one choice set all of this in motion. Sometimes miracles don't look like burning bushes or parting seas. Sometimes they look like honest choices and hard work." "I believe in miracles now," Emily said softly. "Not just the big ones in the Bible, but the everyday ones too. Like finding a family when we thought we were alone." She looked at James and Daniel with affection, then turned to Clara. "And having a mom who never gave up, even when things were really hard." Daniel cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Well, I'd say this calls for a proper celebration. Dinner at Giovanni's? My treat." They spent the evening at the Italian restaurant, sharing pasta and stories. Emily's excitement was contagious, and even Daniel relaxed enough to tell funny stories about his own college days. James watched it all with satisfied contentment, like a master gardener seeing his carefully tended plants flourish. Later that night, after their guests had gone home, Clara followed Emily upstairs to her bedroom. Emily changed into her favorite pajamas, the soft ones with clouds on them that she'd had for years and refused to give up. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the covers as Emily climbed in. "You know what, Mom?" Emily said, snuggling down into her pillow. "I used to worry so much about how we'd afford college. I'd lie awake at night thinking about it." Clara's heart squeezed. "I worried too, sweetheart, but I always knew God had a plan for you. It wasn't just the scholarship that was a miracle," Emily continued thoughtfully. "It was everything. Finding Judge James, helping Daniel remember how to be kind, making a whole new family." She yawned, her eyes growing heavy. "We're not alone anymore." Clara leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "No, we're not alone. And I am so proud of you, Emily. Not just for the scholarship, but for who you are. Your kind heart, your faith, your determination." "I learned it all from you," Emily murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Clara stroked her daughter's hair, whispering softly, "Faith carried us through, baby. Faith in God, faith in each other, faith that doing the right thing matters." She watched as Emily's breathing deepened into sleep, her face peaceful and full of promise. Standing quietly, Clara paused at the doorway, looking back at her sleeping daughter. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting a gentle glow over Emily's face, and Clara's heart swelled with gratitude. The scholarship letter lay on the desk, a testament to answered prayers and unwavering faith. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across James's front porch as Clara and Emily climbed the familiar steps. The old house seemed different now, warmer, more alive. Through the window, they could see Daniel in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to help his father with dinner preparations. Clara smoothed her simple dress, no longer feeling out of place at the grand old home. Emily bounded ahead, carrying a homemade apple pie that they'd baked that morning. The sweet aroma of cinnamon still clung to their clothes. Come in," James called out as they entered, his voice strong despite his age. He stood at the stove, showing Daniel how to properly stir the gravy. "My son here needs all the help he can get with cooking." Daniel looked up with a self-deprecating smile, flour dusting his usually immaculate suit. "I'm beginning to think being a successful businessman didn't prepare me for everything in life." The kitchen was warm and fragrant, with roasting chicken, fresh bread, and vegetables from James's garden. Cookbooks lay open on every surface, and measuring cups were scattered across the counter, evidence of their culinary attempts. Emily set the pie on the counter and went straight to James, giving him a gentle hug. "Need any help, Judge?" she asked, already reaching for an apron. "Thank goodness," Daniel said, laughing. "Someone who actually knows what they're doing." Clara watched them all, her heart full. Just months ago, she'd been alone with Emily, struggling to keep their heads above water. Now here they were, surrounded by love and acceptance. The walls that had once divided them, pride, fear, prejudice, had crumbled in the face of grace and forgiveness. James gestured everyone toward the dining room. "The table still needs setting," he said. "Clara, would you help me with that?" Together, they carried stacks of plates and silverware into the formal dining room. The dark wood table gleamed in the evening light, and fresh flowers brightened the center. As they laid out the place settings, James's hands trembled slightly. "You all right?" Clara asked softly, touching his arm. James nodded, his eyes misty. "More than all right, my dear. When I think of how close I came to losing Daniel forever." He paused, arranging a napkin with careful precision. "And then God sent you and Emily into our lives, like angels, though you didn't know it." From the kitchen came the sound of Emily laughing at something Daniel had said, followed by good-natured bickering over the proper way to mash potatoes. "I think we were all lost in our own ways," Clara replied, straightening a fork. "Me with my pride and fear, Daniel with his anger, you with your regrets. But God had a plan." Soon they gathered around the table, the food arranged before them. Steam rose from the dishes, and the golden evening light streamed through the windows, making everything glow. James sat at the head of the table, Daniel to his right and Clara to his left, with Emily beside her. James raised his hands for grace, and they all joined hands around the table. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "Dear Lord, we thank you for this food, and for the hands that prepared it. But most of all, we thank you for your infinite wisdom in bringing us together, for turning a simple act of honesty into something so much more, for teaching us that family isn't just about blood, it's about love, forgiveness, and grace. Amen," they all murmured. As they passed dishes around, the conversation flowed easily. Emily talked about her upcoming school plans, her eyes bright with possibility. Daniel shared funny stories from his law practice, his face softer now, more like the boy James remembered. Clara contributed tales from the diner, no longer embarrassed about her work, but proud of her resilience. James mostly listened, beaming at them all. He looked healthier than he had in weeks, as if the joy of having his family whole again had renewed his strength. "Remember when you first came to my office?" Daniel asked Clara, spooning more vegetables onto his plate. "I was such a real piece of work," Emily supplied helpfully, making everyone laugh. "That's one way to put it," Daniel agreed, shaking his head. "I couldn't see past my own hurt to recognize what was right in front of me." "We've all grown," Clara said gently. "That's what matters." The meal stretched on as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks visible through the dining room windows. None of them wanted the evening to end. Empty plates were pushed aside as they lingered over coffee and Emily's apple pie, sharing more stories and plans for the future. Clara sat back in her chair, taking in the scene. The wallet she'd found that cold winter night seemed like a lifetime ago. At the time, she'd wondered if it was a test from God. Now she understood it had been so much more. It was a door opening to healing, not just for her and Emily, but for James and Daniel too. James caught her eye across the table and smiled knowingly, as if reading her thoughts. He'd told her once that honesty was like a stone thrown in a pond. The ripples kept spreading outward, touching lives in ways you couldn't imagine. The setting sun cast long shadows across the table, but the room was filled with warmth and light of its own making. Clara looked around at these people who had become her family. James, with his wisdom and compassion, Daniel learning to open his heart again, and Emily flourishing in their love. She remembered all those nights she'd prayed for help, for a way to give Emily a better life. God had answered those prayers, not with money or quick fixes, but with something far more precious, a family, bound together by choice and grace, built on a foundation of honesty and forgiveness. Through the window, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Clara knew now that finding that wallet hadn't been chance or coincidence. It had been God's gentle hand, guiding them all toward healing, toward each other. In that simple moment of choosing honesty over desperation, she'd unknowingly opened the door to redemption not just for herself, but for everyone at this table. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Clara Thompson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.